Alright, so I watched these videos and I bought a brew bag, willing to give it a shot. I've done brewing a bag before with a little 1 gallon batch here on my stove and a 5 gallon paint strainer bag, but never felt confident enough to really do it, with the full 5 gallons. So got the bag, got my duct wrap, my aluminum tape here, and even the smaller of the 2 pulleys they sell here online. So let's give this thing a shot. Now the recipe that I'm going to use for this test is a clone of 80 Acre Hoppy Wheat from Boulevard Brewing Company. I've attempted this several times before, but I have not been able to ever get it right. I found one that someone else had done at revivalbrewlab.com, link posted in the description. I've had to tweak my numbers a bit in the way that I usually brew because my brew kettle, I found out, isn't big enough to do it the way I usually do. It's only 8.5 gallons. You usually need a pretty big kettle to be doing brew in a bag, especially with a 5 gallon. Normally, I start off with about 7 gallons with a 60-minute boil down to 6 in the kettle. Gives me half gallon for trub, then another half gallon for losses in the fermenter, so I have a clean 5 gallons going into the keg. Today, I can't do that. I don't have a kettle big enough, so I am going to count on getting a lot of work back from squeezing the bag. I'm counting on getting a good efficiency on par with what I normally get batch sparging. And I'm counting on not having a lot of losses to trub. I'm going to start with about 6.5 gallons in the boil kettle and end with 5.5, hoping that eventually I still end up with a clean 5 gallons in the keg. Now the bag itself seems very nice. High quality. You can tell some time and effort was put into it. Good stitching. These nylon straps seem pretty sturdy, capable of carrying a lot of weight. Much nicer than the 5 gallon paint strainer bag I use in my 1 gallon batches. But based on the description of it in the brew bag videos, I really had thought it was going to be a fabric I had never seen before. Maybe more like your sheets, more like a linen or something, but it's really a very fine mesh synthetic material. It is literally the same thing as a hop bag that I have. I usually use this to dry hop in my keg. It is the same material, although, as I mentioned, very well constructed. But I thought I'd mention that if you think it was going to be some space-age material you had never seen before, most likely it's not. It is a material you have seen before, although, again, as I said, well constructed. It really doesn't matter whether it's new or not, though, does it? Does it perform? We'll have to see. The grain bill is pretty simple. It's 6.7 pounds of 2-row, 2.3 pounds of malted wheat, and 2.1 pounds of flaked wheat. In the mill here, I've only got the malted wheat in the 2-row. I'll show you what I did different with the flaked wheat in just a minute. So I get started early in the morning with a really fine crush set on here, but notice how I have 2 hands on the drill? That's going to be a problem. Yeah, I lost everything all over the floor. So I had to weigh out all new grain because I wasn't sure what I had crushed and what I hadn't. But notice when I do it the second time, you see the left hand holding it down? Yeah, give that a try. It helped out a lot. Thinking along the same lines of really crushing the grain, I took the flaked wheat and threw it in my blender here. That's one of those that's expensive enough you're embarrassed to tell people how much you spent on it. And I just pulsed it a few good times. I mixed it up there pretty good and got everything pretty well crushed up, but hopefully not too much. Into my kettle I added 7.15 gallons of water. I also did some water additions with this batch. I added enough lactic acid to bring the pH down to about 5.3, and then enough gypsum and calcium chloride to get it up to about 100 parts per million with my chlorides and 150 parts per million with sulfates. I was going for more of a rounded mouthfeel with this beer. I didn't want the sharpness of the hops when you go real high on the sulfates in this one. And then I added the bag to the kettle, which wasn't difficult at all. I will say, however, that my kettle was just past a break point where I ended up having to order a bag that's a little bit baggy for the kettle. Still, everything worked out, though. Okay, so here we can see our ambient temperature is 55 degrees. I placed the binder clips right over the straps, no issues there. And then my strike water heated that up to 166.5, so that's what we're mashing in at, 166.5. I poured the grain directly in. Maybe hard to tell there with the fast-moving video, but I did really crush the grain. You can see the flowering endosperm there. And then I did the little stirring trick where I tried to do it from the bottom. I wasn't really good at it. I ended up stirring it more like I usually do my mash tun, but I did try. Do take note of the level of wort in that kettle right now, though. This beer at that gravity really did push it to the limit. After giving it a good stir and giving it a moment, starting mash temperature was 158.5. Now with the insulation, I'm going to show you this maybe in a little bit of painstaking detail, but I did have a problem holding mash temperature, so I'm going to go through the whole thing here. I put basically a single layer around the bottom of the kettle first. I was concerned about this next layer bowing out around the handles and having too much open air space. So anyways, I started with that. And then I go in with the other bigger portion. I'm also planning on upgrading my kettle before long, so I didn't butcher this and cut it down much. But with all that, I have about 4 layers. 3 on the outer layer and 1 on that smaller first layer around the whole thing. 4 layers of Reflectix, which I was told is duct wrap. I put a double layer, and I pulled that in half, you can see, on top of the lid, and then a little couch pillow to fill that dead space. Next, I put this Barney blanket over it. I did not have a packing blanket, so this is what it's going to look like for the 60 minutes. Once the 60 minutes is up, I remove all my insulation here. You can see it in reverse order and quick speed. And then I'll give it a real good stir as I'm checking the temperature. And after turning everything up real good, decided that my ending mash temperature, it came to 153.8. So that was a loss of over 4 degrees, over 4.5 degrees, 4.7 in an hour. I'll talk more about that later. Conversion did finish, though. You can see with my iodine test here that came out just fine. Everything's staying that nice amber color and mixing in well. Raising the bag is pretty easy with the pulley. Just attaching the straps to the hook there. I will say it would be easier with a carabiner. It also drains a little slower than I thought. That mesh is very fine. You can see how I'm getting ahead of myself. It's spilling out the sides. So that does take a little time to drain. But then I put on my barbecue gloves and I squeezed the bag just as instructed. And I got a lot of wort out of that. It's amazing how much you can get back. And I am kind of lifting as I squeeze. That pulley only has a 150-pound weight limit, so I did not want to rip that down. And I did mix up the grain as shown in the videos as well. Got out a good amount. I probably could have got a little more, but at some point you just get tired of it. And I had a good amount of volume, as I'll show you here in a second. Quick refractometer reading for pre-boil. And then measuring with my volume stick, I ended up with about 6.8 gallons. So a little more than I expected. I decided to try it out as a hop strainer bag too, so I made a spreader with some copper pipe I had left over. You can see I hammered the ends closed and attached it with some stainless steel wire. It does a good job of holding the bag out. Now I've got it in the boil and I'm adding my first addition of hops, 7 grams of Columbus or CTZ. There it is boiling away. Here's the second and last addition of hops, 2.3 ounces of Cascade. I also ended up adding my Warflock tablet and my yeast nutrient into the bag as well. As I drain it, draining happened again slower than I anticipated, and you have to pick up the bag to spread the wort to a part of the bag that's not already gunked up with hops. It's amazing what just a small amount of hops does. It really does clog things up. But it ended up draining in the end. Next thing, it's time to chill. I got my wort chiller hooked up there, an immersion chiller. Swirling it really good. You can see the temperature starts coming down before long. and in just at 11 minutes, I've got it at pitching temperature. I decided not to use my siphon and rather just pick this bad boy up and dump it straight in. I figured there shouldn't be a ton of trub having the bag there, and I gave it the full 5.5 gallons. You can see it right there. I also decided not to worry about sanitizing all of my Puro 2 equipment and rather just went with the old school agitation for aeration. Besides, it's not that big of a beer anyways. This is a full packet of properly rehydrated US-05 yeast. Dump that in and then pop on my drill attachment and give it a good swirl to mix that yeast in. And then I tossed it in my fermentation chamber and set it to 68 degrees. So we end the brew day with 5.5 gallons at 10:55. That's a 75% efficiency. Not too shabby. Fermentation completed just 7 days later. Final gravity was 1012. That brings alcohol to 5.6%. And the next day I chose to go ahead and keg it up. Although I didn't show it, I did break up my dry hopping in half. I did the first half just 3 days after brew day, right in the middle of primary fermentation, and the second half, you can see I'm putting in my dry hop bag there, and I'm just adding it to the keg, and it still sits there today. Hook up a little gas, purge the keg of oxygen, just get a little blanket of CO2 there at the bottom. Transfer took a few minutes. All those hops I put in the primary fermenter clogged up the siphon a little bit. And then you can see here that kind of got stuck around the 1 gallon mark for a little while, but eventually I got it all. So it worked. We've got a hoppy wheat beer here it's very good. I actually had to hurry up and make this video. I realized I'm getting toward the end of the keg. It's been in there for some time now. I thought I'm going to run out of beer and I won't have done a wrap-up of my thoughts on the beer and the procedure, the process. So it is good. I'll say that I don't think it's cloned. It feels at first like it's a little thin. Maybe there's not enough body, but then I wondered maybe it's just out of balance. It's still so hoppy, and that's probably because the keg hops are still sitting in there. And I'm still to this day, and gosh, we're probably a month and a half or so out, you can see it's cleared up a bit, but there's hop debris still in this beer. And I don't know if it's leaking out of the bag, that's very possible, or, you know, it just doesn't, we never cleared out the hops from the initial dry hopping in the primary fermenter. So far as the body goes, I don't think it's the mash temperature. We did lose a decent amount, but where we started and where we ended is still squarely, I think, in the full body range. I can't imagine mashing a much higher on this. I'm thinking maybe it had to do with the yeast as well as the keg hops. Using a more clean, well-attenuating yeast like US-05, the Chico strain in this case, I probably should have done like, well, if I was going to do dry yeast, US-04, or maybe 1028 in the London ale yeast, but I should have done an English ale yeast, I think. So the other two things I was thinking about, the kettle size, I think I was correct there. You could see in the videos when I was mashing, we almost maxed out that kettle. With the 8.5 gallon one that I've got, I might be able to squeeze out like a 1065 gravity beer or so, but really nothing beyond that. With this beer, I did not get a full 5 gallons in the keg, which is like sacrilege for me. You don't do that, you know, you fill the keg. So that was a bit disappointing. I wish I could have ended with 6 gallons in the kettle, but you can see there wasn't room for half a gallon in there. I've been aware for some time that 8.5 gallon kettle is not enough. And so I've been thinking about getting a 10 gallon for some time. But after doing this and seeing how close it was and then running a few calculators about how big do I have to have a mash tun or a kettle of to mash like a no sparge barley wine, and you know, we're looking at north of 10. So I have now decided to get a 15 gallon kettle and I just have to find someone that can ship to Alaska at a reasonable price, and that will be on its way. The mash temperature not holding, that's probably the bigger issue, the one that you were thinking of when you watched this, and the one that struck me the most. We lost 4.7 degrees, so I think the first question is, does that matter? We still, you know, we're in a saccharification range the whole time. The beer is good, but I think it does matter. I think 4.7 degrees is enough of an issue to worry about. Even if you look at the argument of, well, after 30 minutes, 75% of your conversion has already happened. Well, you've lost 2 degrees. I feel like if you were trying to dry a beer out, you wanted to do something in the high 140 range. If I start at 148 and I lose 4.7 degrees, I'm out of conversion range. So I will not convert everything. So I think it matters. I think we got to do something about holding it. So what caused that? I hope it's as simple as user error. I'm not too proud to admit that I could have easily done something wrong. Hopefully someone watching this video could tell me what that is and comment. I hope it's just a real simple, well, you should have done this and not that. Maybe there were gaps in the Reflectix that I was using, or maybe there weren't gaps and there should have been, some gapping between the layers. I'm not sure. Which leads me to the type of insulation. The Reflectix. This did not appear to be the same product that was used by Rex, I believe his name is, from the Brew Bag in the videos. He was using an insulation that looked like it was fiberglass, or insulated with fiberglass, like your household insulation. It would make sense that that's what it is with the aluminum tape. The tape that I bought with the Reflectix, I was like, once I cut it up, I couldn't quite figure out how that was going to help me. When you cut the Reflectix, it really doesn't create much of a seam that you need to deal with. So I couldn't quite figure out what it was for. But if you're using a fiberglass-based insulation type duct wrap, you can understand why you would want aluminum tape. And then batch size. I wondered about this. With a larger mash, I think Rex was doing like an 8.5, 9-gallon batch. He had a bigger mash. There's more thermal mass to a larger mash, I think, than to what I'm doing with a 5-gallon. And so it would make sense that it takes more energy and or time to increase or decrease the temperature of the mash. So did that have something to do with it? I think maybe, but I also think it sounds like there are people on the forums that are holding a 2-degree mash temperature with the 5-gallon batches. So I think something else might be at play. So there's a few other things I want to try now. I'm thinking, what about a smaller batch? What if I use some other sort of insulation or a mash tun? So maybe there'll be additional videos after this. I don't know if it's worth subscribing to my channel or anything like that. I don't know that I'm going to make a thing of these videos, but check back. I have a couple ideas. We'll see if they work out better, worse. But I've enjoyed this. I will say that this brew day was the easiest brew day I've probably ever had, and it's something that I'm looking for. As much as I like looking at those electric systems with the 3 vessels, I need a simple brew day. I've got young children and a limited amount of time to get my brews done. I would love to be able to brew with 1 vessel and have a quick and easy cleanup. Thus far, I'll say, if I was to brew something that is, 1065 or below, and holding a mash temperature right on the money isn't as important, I'm going to brew it just like I did in this video. So I'm enough of a fan, it worked enough that I can go ahead and tell you I have changed my system already, or my process already, for those types of beers. For something that's a little drier, something that I'm looking at the 150, the high 140 range, I don't think this is going to do it for me, though, at least as is, and I am searching for a way to change that. So check back. We'll see if I do another video or not.